see what comes out of it.
Kidding.
We're trying it out.
So whenever I join a new client, I think the first thing I try to do is just to understand whom I'm speaking to. Are these C-levels? Are these head-offs? Are these team leads that do hiring for the first time? And I usually try to just kind of do a bit of a, how do you want me to work with you and how do you like to be worked with kind of conversation. And I think based on how they describe it, usually gives me a lot of ideas of whether they prefer async, whether they prefer calls, do they prefer immediate heads ups, or do they prefer regular kind of timed conversations. And I think that helps me just to kind of get a feel for what does the other prefer, and I'm super happy to adapt to that usually. But for me, it's usually important to just ask them, because I would expect that they have a certain way that they know themselves best, number one. And number two, I think for me, it's just a lot easier to just hear it from them as well, because I feel like that's also a way for them to hold themselves accountable. Because if they say, I prefer for you to communicate with me async, I'll do it async, and I would expect them to respond. I usually deal with quite a few stakeholders at a time, right, as any other talent partner does. And I actually like to keep some sort of notes or like a table. So a table of all my stakeholders, what kind of style or format of communication they prefer. And then I usually would kind of put a bit of a timeline, because some people like weekly updates, some people prefer bi-weekly, some people want to know something every day. So I usually kind of keep a bit of an overview, just to make sure I don't mix things up as well. Yeah, that's a good one. I think it happens more often than less, right? With everyone of us. And I think when I do work with a very challenging stakeholder where it's hard to communicate and it's hard to move forward with certain things, I try to give feedback, but obviously announcing it. So I ask them, I tell them I'm struggling and that I need more things, certain things from them that I would like them to provide me with. Because at the end of the day, I'm working with them, right, towards the common goal. And I asked them, so this is what I observed, this is what holds me back in my work. Now, how would you like me to go about it if you had a preferred way? And usually they give me their perspective on that. And I tell them, well, I've tried this. It didn't work. So I wonder if what is behind that. So I kind of, instead of giving them feedback directly, sometimes I try to get them also to tell me, well, actually, you know what, I'm actually too busy. Probably I'm not the best hiring manager, so let's, go for someone else. So I feel like essentially I try to address it, tell them what I perceived or what I struggle with, how they are involved in that, and then I actually ask them what kind of solution they think is appropriate in that kind of situation. I think the first thing I ask myself is, am I the right person to share it with the person who asks? If I am, to a certain degree, if it's about hiring, for example, I would double check with my main point of contact at the clients to what degree I can share information. And if something can be shared, but not in its entirety, I would also ask them if there is a planned timeline of when this information is expected to be shared with the company, so that at least I can tell the person who asks by when they can expect to hear more, and I can also give them a rough idea of what I know and I can share. So I usually respect my clients' need for confidentiality, because at the end of the day, I think it's also something where good change management, I think is also good to consider. I think everyone communicates differently, so making the effort to understand if the message comes across well and correctly as I intended is important. So I clarify a lot and I ask, does this make sense? And then getting a feel for what kind of communication style and method works best with the other stakeholder, but also keeping things simple, so not over-engineering. I try to cut a lot of redundant parts if I can and if I notice them. I used to write very fluffy sentences. And I think I've made a lot of experiences with stakeholders who just really like to be direct, like to know what needs to be done. And I think this helped me to just kind of keep it more concise as well. And I use a lot more bullet points in async communication to just break it down visually as well. and always making sure that there's a very clear call to action, because at the end of the day, the stakeholder wants to know what they need to do. So that's helped me a lot, and yeah, not using too much jargon as well, if possible, and not making assumptions. So if I think someone should know this, I think this is usually where things go wrong. I think before giving an answer, I think clarifying is good. So I like to ask questions just to make sure I keep my answer focused to what they actually want to know. Because I feel at the end of the day, often certain level of stakeholders don't want to know that much detail, while other stakeholders do want to know the detail. And I think making that distinction is super important. So clarifying what is the extent or the depth that you want to understand, and then tailoring my answer towards that is, I think, the biggest part that I like to do.